Welcome to LaRouche Pack Saturday evening class for October 7th. The subject is Prometheus. Dan titled it A Promethean Vision for the Future. The presenter is Dan Leach, a longtime associate of Lyndon LaRouche, a published poet, 2 volumes of poetry, and well known to many of you. And my name's Tony Pappert. I'm with LaRouche Pack in Detroit area. Bruce Director was scheduled for tonight's presentation, but he had to cancel because of illness. So we'll have Dan begin in just a moment. The subject, as I say, is Prometheus. This is known to many of you as the title and the subject of a 5th century BC Greek tragedy, Prometheus Bound by Aeschylus. But in fact, Prometheus is much older than that play. And the figures goes back tens of thousands of years before that play was first performed. And Dan is going to tell us all about it. I mean, just to begin out of sequence with some things that we'll come to toward the end in greater depth. I mean, this is not ancient history. It's not something you learn in school, especially in today's schools, where you don't learn much of anything. This is a story which is happening around us right now as we speak. We are in the play. We are actors in the Aeschylus play, Prometheus Bound, or more fully in the whole trilogy of Prometheus plays of Aeschylus, of which that was one. That play is going on around us as we speak. And it's even further, that concept, Prometheus, is key to rapid fire changes in our culture that are going on, again, as we speak, during this period of heightened political struggle, as we come down to the wire on the last ditch fight for the existence of the United States in the election of November of next year. So with that as intro, let me bring in Dan.
Thank you, Tony. And hello, everyone. I think for reasons which will become clearer in the days and weeks ahead, we've chosen to have a series. I believe it'll be a series of presentations on our Saturday evening discussions, of which this hopefully will be the first, on this subject of what I call the Promethean principle, because it actually is a principle acting in history. This is not some academic theme, as Tony said, for dry professors to discuss, or simply a historical archetype, if you will, but a living principle, which, as I think we'll show towards the end, is the very essence of what created this country, and all the good that has happened throughout history. It's a theme that Lyndon LaRouche was very dear to his heart. In fact, I think of all the things he discussed, this runs as a thread through his earliest speeches and writings, right up until before he died. And he himself was, I think, very much personified this Promethean character, as we'll demonstrate, I hope. An absolute courageous commitment to the advancement of mankind, and in a mindset that's not only willing to challenge the existing order of things, but to create something good in its place, something higher, something better for humanity. The American Revolution was certainly led by men of this character. Lincoln was a person of this character. Lyndon LaRouche, and I believe Donald Trump as well. These are the true revolutionaries, not simply the people who tear down existing systems, but those who create and inspire others around them to participate in this creative mission. And so this is very much at the center of what we're engaged in today, because this truly is, as Tony said at the beginning, and we'll discuss this more later. This truly is a revolutionary period in history right now. All the old systems are coming down, from political parties to structures to financial systems to military systems. It's a rotten and corrupt system that needs to come down. But if that's all that happens, obviously what you get is chaos and war. You don't get something better. That's what the mission of LaRouche PAC is, and why we're discussing this subject tonight. And in this light, I think it's perfectly clear, or it should become clearer, I should say, that mere conservatism, simply conserving old forms and traditions, just won't cut it at a time like this, because everything is about to go down the tubes, and we've got to create something better. So with that said, let me situate the actual Prometheus principle and talk a little bit about the myth itself, because it comes to us in a number of forms. I'll discuss only two of them tonight. But first of all, for those who don't know, and for those who do, and we're revisiting this, Prometheus is the god, or the Titan rather, a member of the old order of gods, of which Kronos was the head, and Saturn was one of them, and others, who were overthrown by the Olympian gods led by Zeus. And Prometheus helped Zeus overthrow the existing the previous order. Subsequent to that, he stole fire from Zeus and gave it to mankind. In that version of the story, mankind did not have fire, for which he was punished by being chained to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains. So it was supposed to be for all eternity, unless or until he gave up. Unless he gave up and admitted the authority of Zeus. So that's the Prometheus. That's a Prometheus myth. Now, it's interesting because, and I don't have in-depth knowledge of this, but I am told, and I've read, that there are firebringer myths. Myth of a god who brings fire to mankind in many cultures, and going back, as Tony said, many thousands of years. There's a Vedic version of this, of the ancient Vedic religion of the Indian subcontinent. There's a Babylonian myth. I don't purport to know the names of the gods. So there's apparently even one from Sumeria. So there's something about this idea that seems to be universal in culture. Now, my personal opinion as to why that is that this mastery of fire seems to be such a miraculous and I would think sudden occurrence in human history, where suddenly we went from being cave dwellers, scrounging around for food, living maybe 25 or 30 years max, intelligent, but barely with any more power over our surroundings or ability to survive and even think about the future, just mere survival, than the animals around us. Man was in an animal-like state, although there was, of course, always something. There was always a potential for a divine quality in human beings, and then suddenly we have mastery of this process that gives us enormous power over our surroundings. We have the ability to cook food, to stay warm in the winter, to fight off disease, many things you can imagine. And it would appear to ancient civilizations that this had to have been something that was divinely given. And I think that's the reason why why you have these myths. There is nothing in mankind's past until in recent centuries, when we mastered electricity, mastered the atomic processes, but nothing increased man's ability to survive and his power over his surroundings, and demonstrated that there was something absolutely different in human beings than this mastery of fire. So it's pretty important. And so let's look at the actual myth itself. As I said, Prometheus was a Titan, a member of the old race of gods. Now, this is something, just as an aside, I wanted to mention because I think it's important. Lyndon LaRouche, and he's not the only one, but there are other academics and historians who agree with this. But Lyndon LaRouche insisted that the story of the war in the heavens between the Titans and the Olympians, again, there are similar myths in many cultures that actually had a basis in actual history. And Plato, in fact, talks in the Republic about the visit of Solon to Greece, where he heard from to Egypt. I'm sorry, to Egypt, where he heard from the priests of Ammon the story which has come down to us as the story of Atlantis, of a superior race that invaded the Mediterranean region from the west through the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar, that represented a superior civilization based on an island in the Atlantic, and that's why it's called the Atlantean culture, and that they overthrew the existing cultures that existed in the Mediterranean littoral at the time, and that this comes down to us in the form, well, for the Greeks anyway, in the form of this story of the Olympian gods overthrowing the Titans. Now, be that as it may, the first written indication we have of the Prometheus myth comes from the Greek poet Hesiod, who lived roughly at the same time as Homer, 700 to 800 BC, I believe. I don't believe it was his writings were written down. They were an oral tradition written down later, as was Homer. But in Hesiod's story, and I'm going through this because I think when we get to Aeschylus, you'll see why this becomes important. In Hesiod's version of the Prometheus myth, which is he gives in his writing called the Theogony, the story of the gods, basically. It starts with what's called the trick at Mecone. The Mecone was a feast that was held on of the Olympian gods to determine how human beings would sacrifice to the gods henceforth. And Prometheus proposes that Zeus choose between two different kinds of sacrifice, and that would determine how human beings sacrifice to him. One was good meat, but it was wrapped in a ugly-looking belly stomach, basically. The other one was bones and gristle, basically wrapped in glistening fat, so it looked like really scrumptious meat, and that Zeus chose the latter, and which meant that human beings got to keep the meat for themselves and only had to sacrifice the bad things to the gods. And this angered Zeus, at which point he withdraws the use of fire from mankind. And as the story goes, all the useful things that human beings have for survival, agriculture, it doesn't really, I don't know if it specifies it, but in this version of the myth, mankind already has fire. And Zeus withdraws it from mankind in his anger at Prometheus, at which point Prometheus steals fire from Zeus, furthering his sin, and gives it back to mankind. Zeus then famously chains Prometheus chained to this rock. It's supposed to be for all eternity because he can't die. He's immortal. He's one of the gods, and he's to be tortured by having his liver eaten every night or every day by an eagle, which is a symbol of Zeus. And then it grows back because he's a god, and then it happens all over again. And this is supposed to be eternal torture because of this transgression. Now he also, this is interesting, he also, Zeus, that is, in punishment for Prometheus's crime and his pique and anger at mankind, sends what Hesiod says is the first woman, and her name is Pandora. The name may be familiar to you. The myth of Pandora's box. Actually, in Hesiod, it's a jar. Pandora has a jar in which all of the human miseries and maladies are in this jar: mischief, sorrow, disease, death, but also hope. And I won't go through the whole story. The jar gets opened, and all these things escape to the misery of mankind. But she tries to close it, and everything gets out except for hope. At which point Zeus causes it to be forces her, or causes it, I forget which, to be sealed up forever. So you get the idea. All of these horrors are visited on mankind, and that there's no hope. Now, Hesiod explicitly states, and maybe Tony might know something he can say later about it. I don't know the Greek and can't quote it directly, but I'm given to understand that Hesiod explicitly states in his commentary that had not Prometheus tricked Zeus, mankind would have been happy, would have been better off. Our needs would have been provided. We wouldn't have had to work hard. We would have been in the previous condition in which Prometheus found us: dumb but happy serfs, slaves, essentially, barely above the state of animals, no real freedom, but we would have been better off had Prometheus not done this. In this version of the myth, Prometheus is basically kind of like a juvenile delinquent, who simply decides that he's going to trick Zeus, and do these things for mankind. There's no the position of Hesiod is essentially that Prometheus got what he deserved, and that this is the consequence of hubris, of challenging the gods or the existing order. But what is this existing order? This isn't the God of the Bible. This isn't universal, truth and lawfulness. This is an arbitrary. These gods are arbitrary gods. In other words, Hesiod is full. His stories about the gods are full of just criminal, evil things that Zeus is doing, and other gods, towards mankind all the time. Zeus is infamous for having sex with mortal females, and then punishing them, so the Olympian gods really do represent the oligarchical principle and frame of mind. But Hesiod, his essential message, and I know I'm giving this very short shrift, but I think the very fact that he takes that position, that it was a mistake to have done what Prometheus did, his essential message is: don't challenge authority. Don't challenge the established order. Go along, to get along, and you can survive. You might be dumb, but you have a certain kind of a fake happiness, security. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's essentially been the message of every dictatorship in human history, and it's the way that they brainwash people into accepting it. They buy us off. Now, we'll skip 300 years to the Athenian city-state at the time Aeschylus was writing, which was during the time of it was the time of Pericles, right, Tony?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by this point, Athens had emerged as the premier power in the Eastern Mediterranean, having just defeated the Persians. Now, the Persian Empire was
the battles with which Aeschylus was personally involved in, the great battles of that war.
Yes. Matter of fact, on Aeschylus's grave, he wanted it known that he fought in the Battle of Marathon, and completely ignored the fact he was the greatest dramatist of Athens. But yes, Aeschylus was in the Battle of Marathon, which turned the tide of the Persian War. Athens, after defeating Persia, were the undisputed power in that part of the world. Enormous wealth. They were the center of trade, but more importantly, the center of culture, of drama emerged during this time as some of the greatest drama in history. Aeschylus, Sophocles, others. Philosophy. Everyone knows about Plato and his school. Architecture, shipbuilding, and other technologies. I mean, it was a true fluorescence of culture, unlike one of the greatest in history. And it's at this time that Aeschylus is writing, and there's a new spirit that had emerged in Athens at that time, a spirit of confidence in what the human mind could accomplish, and the real power of ideas to shape a culture, and the success of that culture in actually overcoming oligarchical culture. I won't get into the Persian War and why the Athenians were able to win it, but it was a superior culture because their numbers certainly weren't superior. So this is the climate. This is the field of action, if you will, into which Aeschylus is writing his plays, his tragedies, and there are many of them. As a matter of fact, Prometheus Bound was one of at least a trilogy. There are some scholars that think that there may have been 4 Promethean plays. One they know was called The Firebringer. Another one was called Prometheus Unbound, which concluded the story of Prometheus, but these have been lost. The only one we have in its entirety is the Prometheus Bound. Now, in this version, what Aeschylus does is this is a completely different treatment. And I think you'll see why. First of all, he reveals, it's revealed in this play early on, that Zeus intended to completely wipe out the human race. He despised humanity. He thought they were a failure and wanted to just wipe out and create something new. Not unlike certain oligarchs of today, I would say. And Prometheus not only stole fire, not just physical fire, but it's very clear in the Aeschylus version of the Prometheus story that fire itself represents the fire of creative thought, and that of reason, creativity, and all. And Prometheus recites at one point in his complaint about having been punished in this way. I did this for humanity. I gave them everything, and he goes through. He gave mankind all the useful arts: animal husbandry, agriculture, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, everything that has served to raise man above the level of a mere beast. So in this version, it's much more, well, not just much more explicit. It is completely different, because Prometheus in this version isn't just a miscreant or a delinquent. He did this out of love of mankind, and because he I forgot to mention this before. I'm not sure in the Hesiod version if it's quite so clear, but it's very clear in the Aeschylus version. Prometheus means forethought. Metheus, the ability to see into the future. So Prometheus does what he does in full knowledge of what's going to happen to him. That he's going to have to endure this suffering. But he also knows, and the other thing I'll just mention that he gave to mankind, besides everything useful in terms of knowledge and creative thought, he says, but I gave them, most of all, I gave them blind hope. Now, if you think about that for a minute, Prometheus has foresight. He knows the future. He loved mankind enough to give them these things and to suffer for them, but he gives mankind blind hope. If you think about it, if you knew into the future, what would there be to hope for or to not hope for? What would there be to strive? What would there be to strive for? And so there's something about blind hope, and there's nothing about Pandora or hope being sealed up in a jar or anything like that in the Aeschylus version. There's something about this, about blind hope, that's essential to mankind's striving for a better future. He doesn't really elaborate on it, but I think that's a very interesting concept that he put in there. So you can see this is about something much greater than mere rebellion against authority. It's defiance of an arbitrary evil authority system, but it's motivated by a loving concern for humanity, and willingness to suffer for it, which is absolutely critical part of the story. Now Prometheus, because he has foresight, because he knows the future, he knows the eventual fate of Zeus, and we know from what he says in various parts of the dialogue that Zeus is ultimately his rule is not permanent. And of course, this drives Zeus crazy. And he's determined to torture Prometheus until he tells him how he's eventually going to be overthrown so he can, change it. And Prometheus won't do it, even though he's being tortured, hellishly in this way. But he does tell Io. Now, Io is an interesting character in this story. Io is a mortal girl who Zeus took a fancy to at some time in the past and tried to rape, basically. And she tells her father and escapes it, but Zeus's wife, Hera, the goddess Hera, is so jealous of Io because she's, desired by Zeus, that she turns her into a heifer, a cow, and condemns her for all time to wander the earth, being stung by a gadfly, driving her onward all the time. And in this play, Prometheus Bound, Io shows up in the Caucasus Mountains, which she's been driven to, and talks to Prometheus. And Prometheus, she wants to know her future, and Prometheus doesn't want to tell her at first, but then he does, and because he thinks it'll give her some relief of her suffering to know that in some time in the future this will end. And what he tells her is that she will ultimately be after many generations, she'll again be returned to human form. She'll be the mother of a race of heroes, one of whom will be Hercules, which is in the Greek mythology, that Hercules ultimately sets Prometheus free in other versions. But Aeschylus wants to make a point here about Io, and that she will be the cause of the ultimate liberation of Prometheus. Now, we're told that by scholars, and there are accounts in other ancient Greek writers of what those other plays that have not come down to us, the Firebringer and Prometheus Unbound, what the general outline was, even though we don't have the plays. And it is purported that ultimately, indeed, Prometheus is freed after thousands of years, that he endures this suffering, and that ultimately Prometheus and Zeus are reconciled. And I suppose this is to demonstrate that that order is restored in the universe and mankind retains his identity as a creative species. I don't want to speculate as that, because we really don't know, but that's what we're told. Now, I discussed this in a previous presentation. I'm not going to get into it tonight, but the poet Shelley, who wrote in the early 1800s, 19th century, and who was himself a Greek classical scholar, he found out about this supposed resolution to the story, and that it involved the eventual reconciliation of Zeus and Prometheus, and he was just outraged. He said, how can the principle of tyranny and the principle of human freedom ever be reconciled? So he took it upon himself to write his own version, which he called Prometheus Unbound, in which Zeus is overthrown by Prometheus. I won't get into the details of it, but it's in league with the very principle of love itself. He brings it about dramatically that love ends up conquering evil, which that's Shelley, and it's a beautiful play. But regardless, the principle here in what's come down to us from Aeschylus, I think, is pretty clear. First of all, that mankind's fundamental identity is creative, that it comes from something divine, that it's godlike in that sense. But what inspires it, what inspired its creation, in other words, mankind's creative identity itself, what gave birth to it is this special quality of love, which Christians call agape, the highest form of love. It's not simply romantic love. It's not simply friendship. It's the love of all of humanity and the future of humanity. But with the in this case, it's made explicitly clear that it also involves the willingness to sacrifice everything on behalf of that principle, even one's life. And well, in this case, it's not, Prometheus doesn't sacrifice his life; he sacrifices his, enormous suffering without end, not just life. So this theme, now at this point you can recognize that this is not the only occurrence in history of this story. This is the essence of the Christian story on an even higher level. And I won't get into that, but this Promethean principle occurs again and again throughout the succeeding centuries, particularly at times when, as in ancient Athens, it became clear that a special quality of leadership was required from the leading people in society, either because of great crisis or great change, at least. The Romans dealt with it, but in a fairly pedestrian way, I think. It occurs again in some of the paintings and sculpture in the Golden Renaissance in Italy. As you can imagine, it was another great moment in history, a great achievement in culture, and so naturally this Prometheus theme comes up again, alongside of the Christian themes, and then again in the American Revolution, and I think we'll have some future classes on this, but Benjamin Franklin was known as the Prometheus of the 18th century, because not only did he bring fire down for mankind in the form of electricity, as his electrical experiments and succeeding human mastery of electricity, but also he was the guiding intellectual spirit overseeing the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the very creation of our constitutional republic. He was an essential guiding spirit in that. So he really is the Prometheus of the 18th century.
Which Turgot, the French economist, has summarized into a kind of a epigram, just as Dan was saying, of Franklin. He snatched lightning from the heavens and the scepter from tyrants. So directly putting him as Prometheus. And I should have gotten it to put on the screen tonight. I didn't. But Benjamin West, the great American painter whom Chuck Park spoke about some weeks ago, Benjamin West painted a painting which showed Franklin as Prometheus, bringing down lightning from the heavens with his kite experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd like to see that, but you can see this. This has been very much a thread through civilization. There are many more examples we won't go into tonight. I know that Lyndon LaRouche, I believe he first really began to think about this in a serious way in the 1950s. I know he wrote about this. You had, as I also already mentioned, Shelley wrote his Prometheus Unbound, but also Goethe, the German poet of the early 19th century, wrote a poem called Prometheus, which I won't cite here tonight. In his version of it, it very much accentuates Prometheus as a defiant, angry, almost like victim, just hurling defiance at Zeus, which is very consistent with the kind of revolutionary upsurges that were going on in Europe at the time in the Romantic movement. LaRouche was very struck by the way that poem, however, was set by two different composers. One, Hugo Wolf, which really accentuated that very quality of angry defiance, and that of, on the other hand, of Schubert, which had a much more loving and gentle tone at the end of it, that creates a certain upward motion of the mind, you might say. And for LaRouche, this wasn't just an academic question or a question of his musical taste, but because he himself was a creative genius engaged in an active effort to change society, and to defeat the oligarchical principle in our times. For him, this was a very crucial question. The attitude of mind you bring to it, it means everything. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. I myself first thought about this in a very interesting kind of way, because as a young 21-year-old, 22-year-old college dropout, deeply immersed in the counterculture of the early 1970s. I had a friend who was a philosophy student at a major university, and he was taking a course in philosophy in which it was centered around Nietzsche. For those who, Nietzsche is famously the German philosopher that said God is dead, and a pretty thoroughgoing, evil kind of mind. But this college course centered around Nietzsche and Wagner, the German composer. And the two principles that Nietzsche said guided not only art, but culture in general and the universe. Therefore, on the one hand, the Apollonian, in other words, Apollo, who stands for rational thought, order, and you might say the existing order of things, and the Dionysian, after Dionysus, the god of wine, of revelry, of passion, unleashed, passion. In other words, completely arbitrary, pleasure-seeking, but as Nietzsche insisted, that's where the creativity comes from. This is not an unfamiliar subject, because we're always told that there's something in creativity that has to do with madness, and without that you wouldn't have creativity and this kind of nonsense. This really comes out of this Nietzsche bifurcation between the Apollonian and Dionysian principles, and I remember having many discussions about this, with my old friend, and then I met the LaRouche movement, began reading LaRouche's writings, and he's talking about the Promethean principle, and it was like a light went off in my mind. You mean there's a third alternative? You don't have to have this false dichotomy between the Apollonian and Dionysian. There's a third alternative, the creative alternative. It's to challenge existing authority, but not on behalf of one's own personal pleasure, or anything like that. It's on behalf of a loving commitment to better the future for humanity, and not only present humanity, but the future of humanity, posterity, which is right there in our Declaration of Independence and Constitution as well. So that really, for me, was a revelation. And it's interesting to think that this was very much, the Promethean principle was very much in circulation at the time of the American Revolution and right afterwards. But then all of a sudden it kind of disappears, and you get Nietzsche and these kinds of thinkers. I don't think that was an accident. I think it was deliberate suppression of this cultural tradition. So, in our time, sort of in conclusion of my remarks, you really see this, I think, you see it reflected in others. We can talk about that a little bit, but you really see this in a pronounced way to my mind, only two people. One is Lyndon LaRouche, and for many of you who are not familiar with LaRouche, if you look at his life's work, you look at his speeches and writings, this man truly was Promethean. He was uh, uh, he immensely creative, a scientific thinker, cultural thinker, an economist, but just an unending fountain of creative thought and solutions for the existing crisis humanity's in right now, and one of the most visionary thinkers ever about what could be created in the future, from colonizing the moon and Mars to fusion power to many things. But most of all, an absolutely courageous fighter on behalf of those principles, who was willing to put everything on the line. LaRouche really was threatened with assassination repeatedly. He was put in jail and was pretty sure he was probably going to be killed in jail, offered a deal to stay out of jail, but would not take it, much like Socrates, and even ran for president from jail. So this quality of courage, which is not simple defiance, but which comes from, as I said, the same place that it did for Prometheus, of love, and that's where the only thing that could motivate someone to risk their life. When you think of it, it's the quality of a hero in warfare as well. So one of those figures in the last 50 years, I would say, is Lyndon LaRouche, and the other is Donald Trump, who may not be the towering intellectual that LaRouche was. I'm not saying he's not smart, but he's not the kind of depth of thinker that Lyndon LaRouche does, but has demonstrated nonetheless a visionary quality of leadership, willingness to challenge the entire existing order of the world, from the United Nations to the Climate Accord to the NATO, to the entire political establishment, and at times just hurling derision at virtually everything we're taught are the authorities of our time, the august authorities. But a passionate commitment, a courage to take this on, and as we're seeing now, a absolutely courageous willingness to fight despite the threats.
A love for the American people.
Yeah, and as I was going to say, that's where it comes from, a love of the people, which is why people respond to him the way they do. So this is not, as I said at the beginning, this is not an academic question. This is a very live principle shaping our world today, that if more people understand and reflect themselves and take inspiration from it, this is what, as we said in the email invitation to this thing, this is what determines whether a great moment, where everything is changing, the entire existing order is coming down, whether a moment like this, a revolutionary moment in history, will in fact result in something positive coming out of it, or will turn into a tragedy, like the French Revolution. In this case, a lot worse. We could have nuclear war, the descent into a dark age. This is the quality that if we have and we follow and reflect ourselves, can produce that positive result. So I think that's what I wanted to say